I've got a question for you. Have you ever felt like someone was standing just outside your door while you were alone? Don't worry, you might feel that again tonight. I've got a question for you. Have you ever felt like someone was standing just outside your door while you were alone? Don't worry. You might feel that again tonight. The tracker breakups are tough, even when you know they're for the best. I'd been trying to keep myself together after splitting up with my boyfriend of 2.5 years. I don't really want to get into it. It wasn't messy or dramatic. We just weren't right for each other anymore. But that didn't make it any easier. Some days it felt like everything reminded me of him. I'd been forcing myself to stick to no contact, telling myself it was the healthiest way for both of us to move on. It was hard, though really hard. One of the things I missed most about us was playing pool together. It was our thing. I'm a pretty decent player, definitely better than average, but my exie was incredible on his good days. He could pull off trick shots like it was nothing. 1-rail, 2-rail banks, kicks, combinations. I'm pretty sure he was even learning a standard mass. We each had pool tables at home, but obviously we're young and staying inside every night wasn't exactly ideal. When we did go out, we always made sure that wherever we were going, usually a bar had some pool tables. We hated crowded bars with long waits for tables and screaming patrons, so the places we went were quieter, usually attracting an older crowd. Dive bars with old scuffed tables and sticky floors were our sweet spot. Obviously, you can't expect to find a regulation table in pristine condition at any bar, but the dive bars were definitely a better shout than rowdy college bars. We were usually the youngest people there, but we didn't care. At that point in our relationship, we had grown somewhat bored of the typical college let's get plastered every night mentality. Plus, even though I'm kinda shy, my ex was pretty charismatic and could get along with anyone, and us not being total newbies at pool didn't hurt either. A few weeks ago, I found myself missing that part of my life more than usual. It was a random Wednesday, though, so none of my friends were free. I didn't want to sit around the house feeling sorry for myself anymore, so I decided to head out to one of the bars we used to go to. I told myself it wasn't about nostalgia, that I just needed to get out. Believe me, I'm not the type of person, or do I usually have the confidence to go out by myself, but I was feeling some type of way that night. The bar was exactly the same as I remembered. Dim lighting, worn-out stools, a jukebox in the corner. The familiarity was comforting, but it also stung. The memories came flooding back, and I almost turned around and left right then, but I forced myself to stay. After grabbing a few drinks, I wandered over to one of the pool tables and started idly chalking a cue. I'm not really sure what I was planning on doing there. Playing alone would have been a little odd. Luckily, my question was answered when a guy walked over. He was maybe in his mid-20s, the only person in the room even close to my age. He leaned against the table and asked if I was up for a game. I nodded and told him to rack them up. He put some money in the slot and started racking the balls. I laughed to myself as he racked them wrong, but I didn't say anything. We played a few rounds, and I started to relax. He wasn't bad, not as good as my ex, but not terrible. I wasn't going easy on him, though. I won every rack we played. We chatted as we played, and he even bought me a couple of drinks. He was friendly enough, but it quickly became clear he wasn't the brightest guy in the world. I like sharp and quick-witted guys who can hold their own in a conversation. This guy, not so much. Still, I didn't mind. It felt good to just play and talk and not overthink things for once. I was having a good time. After the 4th game, he popped the question, asking if I wanted to go back to his place. The question caught me off guard, but I guess I shouldn't have been too shocked. I froze for a second before shaking my head. I tried to make it playful, saying he'd need a second date for that. In all honesty, I just didn't want to move so quickly. I guess I wouldn't have been totally opposed to taking things further with him, but a random Wednesday night wasn't the time for that. I guess I didn't do a good job turning him down, though, because his entire demeanor changed. His smile dropped, and he literally started scowling at me. I was not prepared for what happened next. He said, "Are you serious?" and grabbed my wrist. saying something about spending all that money on those drinks. Before I could respond, he snatched my purse too. I had never been in a situation like that, so instead of screaming or fighting, I just kind of froze up. Even though we were in a public place, I was still terrified. Luckily, a couple of older guys at the bar noticed what was happening and stepped in. I'm honestly not sure what I would have done had they not. One of them told the guy to let me go, and he glared at me, muttered something under his breath, and threw my purse back onto the table before storming right out of the bar. My heart was still racing, and I thanked those guys profusely for helping me out. That was it for me, though I called an Uber and left the bar, still kind of shocked and trying to process what had just happened. I decided to close my eyes in the Uber, and I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember is the Uber driver gently waking me up. We were parked across the street from my house. I thanked him, got out of the car, and started walking toward the door. As I rummaged through my bag for my keys, I impulsively checked my phone for the first time since leaving the bar. That's when I saw it, that god-awful notification. AirTag found moving with you. I nearly dropped my phone. My hands started to shake as I rummaged through my purse, tossing aside my wallet and makeup until my fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. I pulled it out and stared in disbelief. There was literally an AirTag in my bag. A wave of panic hit me, way worse than what I was feeling earlier. I was still standing in the middle of the street, so I threw it on the ground and stomped on it a bunch of times until I was sure it was broken. I fought back a scream and started breathing heavily. The cold wasn't helping. I needed to get inside. I looked around frantically, but the street was completely empty. Whoever had planted the AirTag, probably that guy from the bar, would know exactly where I was. Maybe not my exact house, but the street for sure. The houses on my street are large and spaced out, so he'd definitely be able to narrow it down. I grabbed my purse and sprinted to the back door, fumbling with the lock before finally getting inside. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I was safe, but I couldn't stop shaking. I walked up to my room, wondering how I had gotten myself into this mess. Normally I'm asleep by 10 and out cold for 9 or 10 hours, but there was no way I was going to sleep that night. I looked out my bedroom window, thinking maybe the scenery would lull me to sleep or something. As I was looking out the window, kind of mindlessly, I noticed an old, beat-up Lincoln Drive slowly past my house. Nothing too unusual, but it was kind of late for cars to be driving on a residential road, but then it came back from the opposite direction, and I knew something was wrong. It passed even slower the second time, like the driver was scanning the houses. I didn't want to face the reality of the situation, but when it passed a third time, I had no choice. It was the guy. It had to be. He was trying to find my house, and I wanted to scream again. The next time the car passed, the driver's side window was rolled halfway down. I wanted to call the police, but I didn't want that guy to know he was in the right area. I know that doesn't make any sense, but I was so scared I couldn't think straight. The next time the car passed, the driver's hand was hanging out of the window holding something that looked like a knife. And then, instead of driving past, the car stopped in the middle of the road, right across from my house. I ducked down, my heart beating a million beats a minute again. I stayed there, crouched below the window, too terrified to move. By the time I looked up, the car was gone. I waited for what must have been an hour, but it didn't come back. The next morning, I told my parents everything. My dad scolded me for not calling the police, but I told him I was too scared to. He called a buddy of his, a police chief, to ask for advice. His friend said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence or the car's plate number, which I hadn't been able to see. He told us to call the police immediately should we ever see that car again. I didn't leave the house for days. Even now, I'm really scared that he's waiting somewhere and he's going to see me enter or exit my house again. I haven't seen the car since, though, so maybe the nightmare is over. The intruder. I don't have the most exciting life, but it's comfortable. I'm 40, single, no kids. Some people might find that depressing, but honestly, I don't mind. I've got a steady job, a decent house, and no one to answer to but myself. I work as a bartender at a high-end luxury rooftop in a neighboring town, catering to the kind of clientele who think regular bars are beneath them. I don't live anywhere near that level of luxury myself. My place is in a pretty middle-of-the-pack neighborhood about 20 minutes away, but working there has its perks. The tips are amazing. People in that area aren't shy about throwing money around, and the rotating crowd keeps things interesting. Since the bar's upscale, we don't have the typical regulars you find in a dive. I like that. I never quite liked how close some customers would get with me, or any other bartender for that matter. Maybe that's just me, though. I like to keep to myself. I should probably mention that my name's Kevin. That'll be important later. It was a Friday night, our busiest night. The place was packed as usual with groups of friends clinking glasses, couples on date nights, and a few folks who probably wandered in just to feel important. I always like playing a mental game with my patrons. I try to figure out which ones are pretending to be something they're not. You can tell a lot about people by the way they order a drink. The ones who ask for complicated cocktails are usually trying to impress someone. The ones who order a whiskey neat. They've had a day. I had my eye on a couple at the end of the bar who were down to their last sips of wine. It's always better to offer a refill before they wave you down. I was in my groove, mixing drinks and chatting with customers, when I noticed someone walk in who definitely looked out of place. I clocked the guy immediately. He was clenching his teeth and scowling like he was furious. He had jet black hair that wasn't combed and sat like a bird's nest on his forehead. He was wearing a blank black hoodie under a faded leather jacket that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. There were stains all over it, but none of that was as unsettling as his face. Like I said, he just looked so angry. He made a beeline for the bar, but he didn't sit down. He just stood there staring at me. I wondered to myself how he had gotten past the doorman in the lobby. I cleared my throat and asked if I could get him something to drink, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the weird vibe he was giving off. He didn't answer right away, which was strange. He just kept glaring at me like he was getting ready to swing. Finally, he muttered that he wanted a double shot of Jaeger. I nodded, grabbed a glass, and poured the shot. Jaeger isn't a drink we pour often here. Most of our patrons ask for something a little higher quality. But hey, if someone wants Jaeger, I'm not about to question their taste. I set the glass in front of him and moved on to serve a few other patrons. When I came back to charge him, he tossed crumpled cash onto the counter. That also threw me off. Hardly anyone pays in cash at this place. Again, though, it wasn't my place to judge. The guy didn't say anything as I rang him up, and I was ready to move on when he spoke again. I still remember his exact words. "I knew I'd find you here, Kevin." I froze. My eyes snapped to his as I scrambled to process what he just said. I put the glass in my hand down and demanded to know how he knew my name. I didn't want to make a scene, so I kept my voice low, but I hoped he understood how serious I was. He didn't answer my question, just stared at me with the same angry intensity. Finally, he said, "I know what you did." Before I could ask him what he meant, he turned and walked toward the elevators. I wanted to yell something or chase after him, but I decided against it. I was on the clock. I couldn't just neglect my job. Instead, I stood there for a moment, completely thrown off. I was honest to God confused out of my mind. I didn't recognize him in the slightest. I couldn't think of anything I had done that would warrant such a cryptic statement. I'm no saint, but I don't go around making enemies. It put me in a sour mood for the rest of the night. When my shift finally ended, I drove home, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened earlier. I racked my brain for literally any explanation that made sense, but couldn't think of any. By the time I went to bed, I was still relatively unsettled by the whole thing. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up randomly. I wasn't really sure what woke me up, as I didn't have to go to the bathroom and I'm usually the type to sleep through the night. I didn't hear or see anything, but something felt off. Without moving, I kept my eyes open, waiting for them to adjust to the darkness. After about a minute, I saw something that gave me an adrenaline rush of fear. There was a dark mass in the corner of my room next to the door. It was just standing there, but I was 100% sure it was something that didn't belong in my room. I felt my heart start to race, but I forced myself to stay still, pretending to still be asleep. Someone was in my room. I repeated that thought to myself like 6 times before truly processing it. I knew I had to do something. I counted silently to 3, and in one quick motion I sprung out of bed, screaming like a crazy person. I was prepared for a fight, but the figure didn't come toward me. Instead, he bolted for the door. As he moved, I heard something clatter to the floor. I chased after him through my house, but by the time I reached the front door, it was wide open, and whoever had been in my room was gone. I wanted to run out into the yard to look for him, but I was worried that he'd be walking directly into a trap. Instead, I made what I still think is the smart decision and slammed the door shut and locked it. I thought back to the clatter I had heard earlier in my room. I walked back to my bedroom, turned on the light, and froze. In the corner of the room, there was a knife just lying there on the floor. It was one of mine, taken from the kitchen. I felt sick. Whoever I had just chased was planning to hurt me, possibly kill me. I called the police right after that, and they quickly arrived and searched both my house and my yard, but found nothing. I gave a description of the man from the bar, and the police got the video footage from my bar, but they haven't been able to find him yet because I haven't heard anything. The thing that freaks me out the most is that I know for a fact I had locked all my doors that night. I locked them every night. During their search, though, the police were never able to figure out how that man entered my house. None of the windows were broken or unlocked, and there was no sign of forced entry. To this day, I still have no idea how he got inside. I haven't seen him since, but I would be lying if I said I don't think about this encounter often. The gas station intruder, I unfortunately had to move back in with my family after my most recent breakup. He and I had been living together in Boston in an apartment we had rented, and just a little word of advice: never sign a lease with someone you've recently started a relationship with. He was not the person I thought he was. My parents live in Western Massachusetts, and if you've ever been to Massachusetts, you'd know the further west you go, the more rural it gets. I'm not much of a country girl. I like being in or near a major city, especially since I'm still in my 20s. My parents' area is super boring. I'm hoping I'm only here temporarily until I can find another apartment I can afford on my own. Though, I'll be staying away from Boston for personal reasons. I had to get a job back at the urgent care facility I used to work at before I moved. They welcomed me back excitedly, even if it's just temporary until I move again. The trade-off with this job, though, is that I tend to work undesirable hours, including overnights. The shifts themselves are easy, but they're boring and completely mess up my sleep schedule and social life. Not that social life is particularly vibrant around here. After my shifts, sometimes I'll stop for what I consider my dinner, usually takeout since not much is open at these hours. This morning, I got out at 4 a.m., and there happens to be a bagel place that opens at that time, serving a variety of foods, so I stopped by and grabbed a chicken sandwich and a salad. I was planning to eat it once I got home. I also had to make a pit stop for gas, so I stopped at the local Shell station, one of the few open at that hour, on my way home. The parking lot is huge, yet I hardly ever see any other cars there, even during the day. I went inside to pay cash to save a little money. When I returned to the pump, there was another car, a blue sedan. A guy got out as I was walking over, and as I began fueling, he started fueling as well. I guess he locked the handle so the gas would dispense automatically because he walked over to my side and said, "Want to see a funny trick?" I immediately hated the interaction, but for some reason, I asked, "What's the trick?" He then did that silly old trick where you pretend to pull your finger off by folding it down with the other hand. He kept looking down at his hands and then back at me with a sarcastic expression, like he knew it was stupid, but I couldn't tell. I fake laughed so he'd go away, but he didn't stop, continuing even after I looked away and tried to ignore him. When I felt the click of the gas nozzle indicating my tank was full, I was so relieved. I quickly returned the nozzle to the pump and hurried inside for my change. When I came back out, The man was gone, though his car was still there, and the hose was still pumping gas. I didn't want to stick around to catch his attention again, so I got back in my car and, out of paranoia, checked the back seats to make sure he wasn't hiding there. I locked the doors and got back on the road, reaching home in about 5 minutes. I was so excited to eat my 4:30 a.m. dinner. I picked up the spare from my parents' hiding spot, unlocked the door, and then quickly hid it back in its place. I locked the door once I entered, as I always do, and went straight to the kitchen to eat. I make sure to be quiet when I get home late so as not to wake up my parents. We only have 2 cars in the family, so I share my mom's car. I didn't need a car in Boston anyway, but since I moved back, I had just been using the hidden spare key they would hide in the front to let myself in. As I was at the table eating, I heard the front door being unlocked and then opening and closing. I stopped chewing and froze to listen with a mouthful of food. I said, "Mom, Dad." No answer. I didn't hear any footsteps or anything. I hurried out of the kitchen to take a peek in the foyer. No one was in there. I felt like my heart was in my throat. I ran up the stairs to my parents' room and barged in. I was horrified to see both my parents in bed, and they were both awoken by my forceful opening of the door. I said very quietly, but in clear panic, that someone had just come inside the house. My dad jumped out of bed and hurried downstairs. I cautiously followed behind him. He turned on all the lights of every room we passed, then went out front to check for the spare key, and it was missing. My mom and I were absolutely horrified, yet my mom still found the time to lecture me for not checking my surroundings before re-hiding the key. My dad began searching every room in the house, and we followed. When he was done checking my older brother's room, he left to continue searching and left the lights on in there. I stayed behind in that room and decided to check a couple of the spots I felt my dad had missed, because I knew internally I didn't expect to find anyone. I checked under the bed and then the closets. Nothing. So I went downstairs to the main floor. It seemed my dad was already checking the basement. I was honestly horrified to go into the basement right now, even with my dad down there, so I stayed on the middle floor with my mom. But curiosity got me, and I went to the dining room, which is adjacent to the foyer by the front door. I got down on my knees and looked under the table, and there he was. It truly did not feel real. There was that man from the gas station hiding under the dining room table. I recognized him instantly. I screamed as loud as I could, and my mom started screaming too. My 65-year-old dad came up the stairs as fast as he could, ready to fight this intruder. The man came out from under the table and began fending off my dad, who was at least 20 years his senior. And as my mom and I saw him overpowering my dad, we began doing whatever we could as well, hitting and punching at the man while my dad still held on to him. It was when all 3 of us were attacking him that he finally decided to retreat and fled through the front door. We called the cops and thanked God for the quick response time. However, that man still had the key to the front door. That night, the police left a police car parked in our driveway to deter him from coming back. My dad wedged a chair in front of the front door as well and slept in the living room. The next day, he switched out the lock to the front door, and with that, my parents' days of hiding a key outside were over. I do feel guilty for bringing that dangerous man to my parents' house, and it was definitely on me for being careless. But honestly, I think that man followed me with his headlights off because I didn't see any cars behind me the entire ride home. I'm happy for my and my family's safety, though this just makes me want to move out of here even more. The silent patrons. I work as a bartender at a bar and restaurant in a suburb just outside Baltimore. I'll do my best to explain the layout so the story makes sense. It's a busy place with a unique setup. There are no waiters, just bartenders like me and the cooks in the back. If you want food or non-alcoholic drinks, you have to order them at the bar, and when everything's ready, you grab it from the counter. I'm not sure why things are done that way, but I guess it has something to do with management being cheap and trying to avoid hiring waiters. Either way, it keeps things fast-paced, which I actually like. For whatever reason, the place is really popular, even though I personally don't think it's anything super special. The atmosphere is lively most nights, with great music, a buzzing crowd, and a standing area near the DJ booth where people gather to dance and chat. The constant flow of customers and the high-energy vibe make the job fly by. I love meeting and talking to new people, so the gig is perfect for me. I would probably lose my mind if I had to wait long periods of time between serving guests, but that's just me. I bet some people are the opposite. That particular night started off like any other. It was a weekend, so things were going to be super busy. I was ready. After a certain time, the bar started filling up with people. It looked like more of a younger college crowd that night, which meant more dancing, more spilling, and a rowdier environment in general. Oh yeah, and worse. Tips, which kind of sucked for me. This one group of kids just kept ordering round after round of tequila shots faster than I could line up the salt and limes. It's always chaos when they take over the bar, and one of them was so plastered he used the same pickup line on me like 3 times. I was running around doing my thing when I noticed an elderly couple walk in and sit down at the booth in the corner of the restaurant. At first glance, there was nothing strange about them. I just thought it was interesting that 2 people that age would want to come into a rowdy place like this. I didn't have too much time to think about it though, so I went back to work. Fast forward maybe 30 minutes to an hour. I was halfway through pouring a line of gin and tonics when I noticed the couple again. My hands kept working, muscle memory taking over, but my brain was stuck on them for some reason. That's when it hit me. They were just sitting there, motionless. They hadn't ordered anything, either no food and definitely not any drinks, I would have remembered. I looked a little closer and realized they weren't even looking at each other. They were both fixated on the wall next to them. From what I could tell, it didn't look like they were talking either. It was the strangest thing. I was beyond curious, but the bar was slammed, and I had too much to do to spend time wondering about it. I figured they might be waiting for someone, or didn't realize how the place worked. Maybe they were waiting for a waiter to take their order. When I finally had a break, I decided to check on them myself. I walked over to the table and put on my most polite smile. As I approached, neither of them turned to face me. They were both still staring at the wall like statues. I cleared my throat and asked them if they wanted anything to eat or drink. The woman didn't even flinch. She kept staring at the wall like I hadn't spoken at all. The man turned his head slowly, like he was moving in slow motion. When his face came into view, I felt a chill run through me. His skin was pale and wrinkled, and his eyes were almost sunken into his face completely. He didn't speak, just stared at me and shook his head once, firmly but silently. Something about the way he looked at me made my stomach twist. I muttered something in response and quickly returned to the bar. I had the weirdest feeling in my gut after that. Those people looked like they didn't even belong in this century, let alone this bar. I didn't look over at that booth for a long time. Eventually, things started to die down a little, and I remembered the couple. I glanced over impulsively, and I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. Both of them were staring directly at me now. I made direct eye contact with the woman, but she never averted her gaze. I don't think I'd ever been more uncomfortable at my job than I was in that moment. I looked away and pretended to be busy, trying not to freak out completely. By the time I glanced back again, the booth was empty. I was relieved, just glad that they were gone, as mean as that sounds. By the end of the night, I was still thinking about the whole thing. As I wiped down the bar and closed up with my coworker Karen, I decided to ask her if she'd seen anything strange. She's, I guess, what you would call a vet. She's been working there for years and prides herself on noticing everything and everyone that comes through the doors. When I asked her about the couple, she gave me a confused look and said she didn't know what I was talking about. I looked at her blankly and told her I meant the elderly couple sitting in the corner booth. She shook her head and told me she didn't remember seeing anyone like that. She then jokingly asked me if I was hallucinating, which got a playful laugh out of me. But on the inside, I was losing it. I knew what I had seen. I asked her if she was sure, and she crossed her arms before listing at least 10 random people who had ordered food that night and what they were wearing. I laughed again and complimented her memory. But, like I said before, I was dying on the inside. By the time we locked up, I started doubting myself. As I walked to my car, I noticed something that made me nearly drop my keys in fear. Across the street, there were two dark figures standing under a lone streetlight. I knew it was them. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. I didn't wait another second. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped out of the lot without another look. The drive home was awful. I was trying not to break down the whole time, just kept repeating "oh my God" over and over. I had so many questions. Had Karen somehow missed them? Were those people even real? Was I going insane? I couldn't explain it. I thought I was going crazy. I wish this story had a resolved ending, but it doesn't. I never saw those people again. I never got any kind of explanation. I don't think I ever will. The highway setup I like driving at night because there's nothing I hate more than driving in traffic. I'm from New York, Long Island specifically, and the traffic here is truly unbearable. My brother lives in Florida, and I like to visit pretty often. But it's a long drive. Depending on when you leave, it could be upwards of 18 hours. I like to leave New York very early in the morning, like 2 a.m., so that I can be out of all the high traffic areas before cars are on the road. So it was a Thursday morning at 2 a.m. when I was leaving home to get on the road. I stopped for my morning coffee at Dunkin' Donuts, knowing I had a long, grueling drive ahead of me. The reason I was driving and not flying was because I was going to be down there for a whole month, and I didn't want to rely on my brother to take me everywhere I needed to go. By the time I was off Long Island, it was after 3 a.m., and it was smooth sailing from Jersey. The drive from New York to Florida is very easy once you're out of the New York. You take the I-95 all the way down. At about 4 a.m., the hunger was starting to set in, so I pulled off the I-95 at the first food sign I saw. I noticed Wendy's on the sign and figured I'd get breakfast there. I had skipped breakfast at the house because waking up so early, your brain doesn't realize you're hungry for a few hours, at least for me personally. I followed the signs to the Wendy's. I was in some random spot in Jersey. There were no streetlights, and I felt like I was in the middle of nowhere. The only light was from my headlights. When I got to the Wendy's parking lot, some of the lights were on, and I saw a car parked there, so I pulled into the drive-thru. The menu was lit up, so I thought it was open. But I sat there for over a minute staring at the intercom, waiting for someone to greet me. And they didn't. I even said, "Excuse me," but nothing. I pulled out my phone and looked up the Wendy's, and wouldn't you know it, it didn't open until 6 a.m. And then, suddenly, 3 knocks at my window almost sent me out of my seat. I turned to my right and saw a man at my window, smiling. He motioned for me to lower the window. I didn't feel comfortable doing that, so I cracked it just enough to hear him. He said the place wasn't open, and I said yeah, I had just found that out. He then told me he was stranded. He pointed at the one other car in the parking lot and said his battery died. He practically begged me to help him jumpstart his car. I told him I didn't have jumper cables, and he said not to worry. He had them in his trunk. I looked again at his car in the corner spot by the woods and said, okay, I believe in karma, and I knew it'd have bad karma if I left this man stranded when I could help. He backed away so I could pull my car next to his. Since he was parked head in, I did the same to align our hoods as close as possible. I got out after popping my hood. He went to pop his hood and grabbed the jumper cables. After we connected the cables to the terminals, I started my car again. We gave it a minute before I told him he should try starting his. He took his sweet time walking inside, but when he tried, the car didn't start. So we gave it another couple of minutes, and he tried again. Still nothing. This was weird considering he'd just been driving, so the battery shouldn't need that long to get enough charge. The guy then asked me to hang on while he walked away and got on his phone. He started speaking in Spanish in a low voice. I can't understand Spanish, so I didn't bother trying to listen. He came back after the call and said his friend told him to give it a few more minutes and try again. I said okay. I was trying to do the right thing, but I was hoping this wouldn't eat up much more time. The last thing I was expecting was the aggressive sound of 2 pickup trucks flooring it into the parking lot from each side of the building. I instantly put it together. I said "oh shit" under my breath as I yanked the jumper cables off my battery and slammed my hood shut, but it was too late. The two trucks pulled up behind my car, trapping me in. I had to think on my feet. I looked at the man, who was still smiling at me, but now the smile looked and felt much more nefarious and evil. The look he gave me was so unsettling, and it's engraved in my memory. I locked my car with my key fob and darted into the woods. I ran in the dark, cutting up my shins on God knows what. I tripped over something on the ground, and at that point I took it as the moment to lay down and make myself as tiny as possible. I heard a few men yelling in Spanish somewhere in the woods. I was so scared for my life as the voices got closer. I don't think it gets any more tense than what I was experiencing in that moment. I didn't know how many there were. I didn't know if they were armed. But I heard at least 3 voices. Then the voices started fading away back into the distance, and I felt a sense of relief until the sound of my car alarm going off in the distance. All of my stuff was packed in the back of my car, hundreds of dollars worth of clothes, shoes, watches, bracelets. I started making my way back to the parking lot, crouching down. By the time I got close enough to see, it was just my car there. All 3 other vehicles were gone. I ran out to my car, and it was anyone's worst nightmare. My rear window was shattered, and all of my stuff was gone, basically 80% of my entire wardrobe just stolen. My suitcase in the trunk, all the bags in the back seats, everything. I actually started to shed tears out of pure stress. I called the police and explained everything. The officers on scene told me they would have to get the CCTV footage from the Wendy's when it opened. After taking all of my information, they told me I didn't need to stay in town and they would be in touch. I was about 2 hours from home. I turned around and drove back. It was the most stressful, depressing, and defeated drive of my life. To make matters worse, I was contacted by the police department in Jersey, and they told me the vehicle on the Wendy's lot had a fake license plate, and the 2 pickup trucks didn't have plates at all. They told me they would still do what they could, but I knew that was just them trying to give me a sense of hope. My stuff was never found. Those bastards got away with it. Like I said, I believe in karma, and I hope those pieces of filth got what was coming to them. The rest stop man. We've all taken a long car trip, haven't we? We've all passed that rest area sign multiple times, wondering if we could make it another 20 minutes before having to take a pee break or stretch. Sometimes you're lucky and get one of those huge rest areas with big buildings and food and everything. But most other times, depending on where you are, you're lucky to get a tiny one with a small building just for restrooms and nothing else. Well, I was on a long road trip, a 15-hour road trip actually, and a big chunk of that drive was overnight. I won't say from where to where because I don't think it matters much, but I will say I was in some bumfuck area on the east coast of the US. It was late at night and I was powering through the drive. Not many cars on the road at this hour. In fact, it was rare to even see another car this late. I was reaching that uncomfortable point where I had to use the bathroom and I was getting overall antsy in my seat from sitting so long. I started keeping an eye out for a rest area sign, and when I saw that familiar blue sign, it felt like a saving grace. A few miles later, I veered off into the rest area. It was a small one, but there was a restroom building and that was all I needed. There were no trucks parked there. I'm pretty sure they can only stay overnight at designated truck rest stops, but there was another car in the lot. I considered the possibility that whoever owned it was asleep inside. As I got out, I stretched a bit, and on my way to the bathroom, I looked at the other car, but its windows were tinted so I couldn't see if someone was in it. Not that it mattered. I was just curious. I went inside the bathroom and was faced with a strange sight. There was a man standing in the corner of the bathroom with his head down and his back toward me. At first, I thought he was using the urinal, but I quickly realized he wasn't even facing the closest urinal. He was literally facing the corner of the wall. I paused, unsure whether to say something or not. I almost said, "Are you all right?" But the scene was too weird. I had to walk closer to him to get to the stall, and honestly, I was almost scared to get near him. I tried to mind my business and kept a normal pace. I went into the stall and closed the door. Honestly, though, I couldn't go to the bathroom with someone else in the room, in one of those people. It was too dead silent in there. It was weird. I stood in the stall for like a minute trying to at least pee, but I couldn't. I flushed anyway and left the stall, but now the man had turned around. He was still in the same spot, but now he was facing me. I could see his face, and he was looking right at me. I'm not one to judge someone's appearance, but this man was the scariest looking man I had ever seen. There was something so unsettling about his face, specifically his eyes. The expression he had was a blank, empty stare. I hadn't had a social interaction in over 10 hours, and this caught me way off guard. Instead of saying anything, I quickly turned and headed out of the bathroom. I got to my car and wasted no time turning it on and backing up. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw that man walking in the direction of my car. I drove fast to get him out of my sight. I was relieved to get back on the highway, but that was the only relief I got. I still had to use the bathroom. I was sure it would only be another 20 minutes or so until the next rest area. I could hold it. I was right. It was about 20 minutes before I got to the next one. It was another nearly identical one, as most of them are. No cars were in this one, thank God. I pulled into a spot right in front of the bathroom and hurried to the stall. And let's just say I felt a lot better very quickly. As I was finishing up in the stall, I heard footsteps enter the room. I thought they'd stop at one of the urinals, but the footsteps came straight to the stall and stopped. I saw someone's shoes through the bottom crack of the door. They were literally standing on the other side of the stall. My first thought was that it was that guy from the other bathroom. He followed me. My social anxiety was handicapping me from saying anything initially, until I finally mustered up the courage to say, "Someone's in here." No response. Now I knew I was in trouble. The only thing I could do was dial 911 and put it on speaker so the man could hear the operator say, "911, what's your emergency?" I said loud and clear, "I'm being followed by a dangerous man. I feel threatened." As the operator asked my location and details, I answered everything in a loud voice, in a tone basically implying a fuck you to the man. Thank God this worked. As the person turned and walked out of the bathroom, I told this to the operator, but said I would still feel safer waiting in the stall until police came, and that's what I did. A knock at the bathroom door from a police officer was my cue to safely come out. I described the man and the vehicle I saw at the other rest area, the creepy encounter, and then the second creepy encounter at this one. We checked my car as well to make sure it wasn't messed with. After determining that he was gone, the officer and I left the rest area at the same time, and eventually he turned off the highway. The rest of my road trip went normal, but damn, this was a terrifying night. I'd never been followed before. I know with almost 100% certainty that the person outside the stall was the same creep from the first bathroom. It feels extra weird because I'm a male. These things usually seem to happen to women, but I guess it can really happen to anyone.